Okay, what I thought we'd do this morning and is really focus on mentoring, but really with a slant to how mentoring can really be helpful for you with your career. And so part of this is I'm going to ask you to almost think a little bit selfishly about mentoring, because I want you, one of my goals for today is to make sure that you think of why this is something you need to be doing. Not just, I'm guessing all of you are probably mentoring someone else, but also how this can enhance where you're going. Okay? Now, the way I look at academic careers nowadays is they're roller coasters. And if you're like me, I lived in Hershey, Pennsylvania, which has Hershey Park with all these roller coasters. I don't like roller coasters. I cry. In fact, my kids love to go with me on the roller coaster because they'd laugh at, when they were little, they'd laugh at their mother who would be, ah. But in one sense right now, academics is at a stage where things are changing. And it's changing in ways we can't predict exactly what's going to happen. Now, as students, you already have an idea of what you're interested in, where you want to go. Junior faculty, you're busy thinking, okay, how do I swim through this and make a success of what I'm doing here at Creighton? Those of you who are associate professors, boy, you've worked really hard to get where you're going, and the rules keep changing. Things never stay the same. And then for those of us who are a little more senior, it's what's around the bend. Should I be doing the same things I'm doing now forever and ever? What do I need to change? And I would say, just in general, our academic worlds are much more difficult to navigate. And I'm going to give you an example of this to explain it. In the old days, it was really easy to kind of know where you were. You get your appointment, you get your training, you get your first faculty position, your department work within another unit, and then here's the university, and here's the universe of the all academic medicine. It was pretty linear, okay? Now, what I want to share with you is this is where we live now. Most of you may have appointments in 2 different departments, and then you're part of a center that's looking at women's health, or maybe you're part of a geriatric group, and you're collaborating with some folks on a grant. And you've got collaborators up in Chicago, and they got snowed in this week. And you're working on a national portfolio. And this is what academics really looks like, okay? It's not that clean, ordered progression. It's this. And I would argue if each of you thinks about the paths you have and the relationships you need to navigate, sometimes it's kind of tricky to figure out which one do I pay attention to. Where do I get the bang for my buck? Should I take on a new circle, a new relationship, a new responsibility? So when we talk about academic careers being difficult to navigate, this is one of what we mean. Now, when I think of good to great, I think of Jim Collins. He's a business guy. There are a lot of folks out in the business world that have some good ideas for us. And he's always writing about how organizations can excel. And I kind of took some of his points and I paraphrased them for what we do. I think to have a great academic career, you absolutely have to know what your passions are. And that's something that no one can tell you. You have to be the driver of that. And if you're passionate about what you're doing, and work is easy, work is play. You run to work instead of saying, oh, it's -10 out this morning and I want to go back to bed. You come to work and say, can I come in at 6 o'clock? I've got things to do. A good professional builds to your strengths. And that is, in academics, we have to be unique. We have to each bring something to our universities that our colleagues sitting next to us needs, that our universities can't afford to have us all be clones of each other. We need to be pillars of strength that are next to each other. And then nowadays, and this is true in academia as in business, we work in teams. We get together in groups. We may have a project, maybe we're working on a research project, but we need a statistician, we need the image analysis folks. I need a pharmacologist who knows something about drug delivery. I'm working, in pediatrics. I need a team. And nowadays, the challenge for your career success is to look at what you're doing and also make sure you have the very best people on your team that you can find. And then, know what drives your resource engine. That's Jim Collins' kind of business speak. What that means is, do you have the right resources that are behind you to get the work done? The good news is, both at my institution at the University of Pittsburgh and here at Creighton, you have wonderful resources. You've got a great physical plant. We have a great physical plant. We're both in cities that have made it through the economic downturn okay. In fact, yours is just growing by leaps and bounds. But when I talk about resource engines for academic careers, it's not always time or money. It's the individuals who are willing to invest in you as a mentor. And so mentoring is what I'm going to be talking about. So again, we all need help, and help is not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of strength. It's gathering the resources around you that you need to accomplish your task. Whether your task is clinical, or it's translational, or it's basic science, or it's education, or it's pure practice, we need to make sure we've got the right players helping us accomplish what we do. And I'm just making the assumption that each of you in this room are leaders of your own scholarship, of your own research programs. And the research program doesn't have to have large space and large funds to be very important in the concepts and the work that you generate that turns into scholarship. So my take-home message is find time to find a mentor or even multiple mentors. So what I'd like to do this morning is share some ideas with how mentoring can help you be successful. We'll review some of the roles and benefits of having a mentor, and then we'll take a little time and reflect on how mentoring has impacted your progress to date. And then I'd like to leave you with some ideas that you might put into action about how mentoring can empower your own success. So let's start out with an assumption that mentoring is a strategy that really is essential to your long-term success. Now, I know there are a few of you in the room that look like you're 20 or 25, right? But most of us are a little bit older than that. And the way things are going, we're all going to be working till we're 70, 75, 80. It's going to go up there. You are just in the prime of your career, getting ready for the next phase. And I look at it that academic careers are a long haul. And I think when we're students and residents and postdocs, we're thinking of, okay, just that next stop, get a job. I need that faculty position. Well, for those of you in your faculty positions, that's just the beginning. And you're trying to build something that you can grow and sustain over the next 20, 30, maybe 40 years to really make an impact on your community, on your society, and improve our nation's health and the world's health. So think of mentoring as something that will also make this academic world that you're in more pleasurable, more easy to navigate, and more successful, okay? There is nothing worse than someone having spent 20, 30 years on something and saying, boy, I didn't like that. I mean, that would be horrible. What we want is that you are doing something that you're passionate about, that adds value to your communities, and is really a deep source of joy. What's mentoring? Mentoring is a social agreement that's mutual between two different parties. At least two or more. It could be more. I think the hallmark of it is that it empowers us to capitalize on each other's strengths. And it's a way to also shore up weaknesses, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But good mentoring gives support and guidance to individuals so that they're sometimes willing to think outside of the box a little bit, to take a risk. And a risk is something that's not always guaranteed. And in fact, when there's a risk, there's always that risk that we might fail at something. But however, if you don't step out of your boundaries, out of your comfort zones, you're never also going to keep learning. And we, as humans, learn from things that don't work as well as the things that work well. I don't know how many of you are basic scientists in the room? There are a few, yeah. We have a fairly high failure rate in our experiments, right? Yeah. It's always nice after we've done 9 or 10 versions to finally get the assay to run and to get the experiment to run. But if things work the first time, we would be wonderkin. And that's true on the clinical side. When you're trying to do a clinical trial, it's very complicated to get your patients in, to get them enrolled, to get them to stay with you, and also to understand what the data means. Sometimes we do experiments or we do research studies, not just experiments. And we find at the end of the study we have more questions than answers. So that's part of what we do. Now, I would also argue at every stage of your career, as you take on different responsibilities, you probably need a new mentor. And, you know, think back to when you were undergraduates or doing your graduate training or doing your residency training. That was fairly easy to recognize that you need mentors. But as early stage faculty, new faculty, you need special care and attention because there's a lot to learn about the organization. But I would also say as you move through tenure and promotion and you really become part of the fabric of the institution with a lot of institutional knowledge, there are times you're going to be asked to take on a new responsibility. And my rule of thumb is every time I'm asked to do something new that I've never done before, I try to quickly find someone who is doing a good job of that and asking them if they'll be happy to talk with me or meet with me to give me some advice and feedback on how I'm doing. And sometimes it's that little extra confidence that's needed. And trust me, are there any department chairs with us today? Okay, but if there were chairs or deans in the room, I'm assuming the dean isn't here. They need mentors too, because, you know, again, deans and chairs don't sprout spontaneously. They develop and they take on new challenges and responsibilities. Mentoring is a great way to keep learning as your responsibilities and your personal needs change over time. So what is a mentor? I consider in academia a mentor is somebody who is really generous and willing to support the professional development of a colleague. And again, being interested in the professional development of the mentee is a great experience for the mentor. They learn a lot, but they're willing to share their expertise, their experiences. They're willing to provide advice and counsel. And I think a good mentor can often open doors and point a mentee in directions they may not have considered. But most of all, a mentor does not do the heavy lifting of the work for the mentee, but they can ask great questions. A good mentor is someone who will say, why do you want to do this now? They'll ask a good question and challenge you. Now, mentors can have many, many roles. And mentors can be, we can talk about who might be a mentor for you. I have some neighbors who are in the business community, and at times one of my neighbors is a really great mentor because they look at what we do a little bit differently. But here are a whole host of relationships that a mentor can be. And sometimes as a mentor you change hats. One day you're a coach and the next day you're a reality check. And for example, mentor is a guide. Someone who really is giving the mentee guidance on this is how things work. this is where to go and how to learn from things that don't always work well. Sometimes mentors are allies, and frankly, this is a great role within a departmental setting for a mentor, because a mentor can really help you understand the culture. Or if, for example, and there are times we all do things that are perceived by others quite differently than how we intended them. A mentor can really help you through that tough situation. If you think other individuals are misperceiving your motivation, or you've said something and it was taken out of context, a mentor can be very good. And that feedback of how to handle a difficult situation can be essential. And then I think an important role for a mentor in our academic world is to be a champion or an advocate for the mentee. Sometimes when we're mentoring individuals that are junior faculty or residents, they're a little timid about understanding their self-worth. And if you can open the door, maybe you introduce them to a section editor of a journal, or you introduce them to someone at NIH who's putting together a study section panel and looking for new members. Or you introduce them to another department where there are some potential collaborators for them. That's where sometimes having someone who's willing to say, hey, you know, Joan, you know, she came from Pittsburgh, but you know what, she's got some good ideas. You know, I encourage you to listen to her. Having champions and advocates can be very important. Now, one thing I just want to mention briefly is that it can be a challenge to mentor across differences. And oftentimes, if you're in a formal mentoring program, somebody's assigned to you, and whoever makes the matches usually tries to find some grounds for common interests. That being said, I mentor individuals that have very different backgrounds. In fact, right now I'm mentoring a lot of clinical fellows and clinical faculty, and I'm a basic scientist. It means when I work with these mentees, I have to really listen hard to what they're doing, where they want to go, and I have to be on my toes. But when we talk about mentoring across differences, the gender differences are usually obvious. Race and age, those are obvious. I find sometimes the ones that are more difficult for me as real differences is that different generations have different goals, different lifestyle issues that they're considering. I think there are differences in physical capability. Not everyone wants to work 24 hours a day. And that's a personal preference. I know I have folks that I mentor, they're constantly at work and they're seldom at home. And that's not how everyone wants to live their life. And what is your physical capability may not be, or capacity even, for work may not even be the same as the person you're mentoring. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't have something good to contribute. It just means they're different from you. And then I think also too the outside responsibilities come into play. I know caring for aging parents or a child who is sick can really make an impact on what's going on in the professional world, and yet it's a world these responsibilities don't occur in the professional workplace. So again, I think it's very important to be aware of being a good mentor across differences. Not all your mentees are going to look like you or want to be like you when they grow up. And I also think we also have to recognize generational differences. And again, I think you all know the boomers are aging quickly, but we come from a generation where we work and we like to work and we're loyal. And the millennials who are out here after Generation X, they look at us and laugh and say, well, you know, I look at the world very differently. My life experience has been differently. Somebody was just discussing with me that the generation now of students have, the post 9/11 generation, has always been in a nation that's at war. And that's very different from, say, Generation X, okay? This is important to think about as a mentor, because when you're assessing your relationship with a mentee, as the mentor, you need to be aware that these could be differences that impact how the two of you work together. Okay, you have all been good and patient and listening, and what I'd like you to do, and I'm just assuming you know each other. Well, if not, this is a good time to exchange email addresses and get to know each other. So I'm going to ask you to kind of cluster in groups right where you're sitting and share with each other over the next 5 minutes or so, share with each other what was an example of some best mentoring you've ever received, okay? And we'll then talk about why was this effective mentoring and why do you still remember it, okay? So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes, okay? And say hello, and I want to make sure everyone finds a group, okay? We're going to move you with, this group looks pretty big. Can maybe the 3 of you work? Okay. Okay, I'm going to have to interrupt. I know you're having some very rich conversations. Okay. Some thoughts on this. Can you all remember a time when somebody was mentoring really made a difference? Okay. So why is it that you still remember it? You know, why is it that mentoring that you received is still very special? Was it associated with making a decision in some cases? Okay.
It helped us to be where we are today.
Okay, it really made a difference. Okay. And was the person who was doing the mentoring generous with you? Right. Did they get rich from taking time to talk with you? Right. And were they were also really caring about your success. It wasn't their success, but your success. Okay. But I'll share with you, one of the reasons you probably still remember it is because it really made a difference for you in where you are. There's a lot of emotions around it, because this is something that really is near and dear to your careers and your creativity and your self-expression as an individual. Okay. So remember that, because I think it's important sometimes to remember that mentoring can really make a difference that's lasting. And I don't know how many years ago this mentoring was. Maybe it was mentoring you had last week, but I'm guessing for some of you it's somebody who mentored you several years ago or many years ago. And you still cherish that. And I think that's important to remember as we talk about mentoring. Okay? Any other thoughts on this too? Yeah.
Well, one of the things I see is the difference between me generation
Okay.
and at least the way I grew up, which was not that.
Mm-hmm.
And how can you be a mentor if it's all me?
Okay, that's a good question. And in fact, we'll talk about that a little bit more. I would also say the question is, why is this generation saying me, 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 and why are we perceiving it? The challenge for us as mentors is how to mentor that generation, okay? Because they may not want what we have to offer as mentors too. And so that's another, to make it even more complicated. We were discussing that earlier this morning at another session where, and we'll talk about this, but sometimes it's the capacity of individuals to work too. You may be someone who works very conscientiously and take your responsibilities very seriously, and then another generation seems like, well, it doesn't matter. I know some of you from having an opportunity to meet with you, that you take your professional responsibilities very seriously. There are going to be mentees who don't have the same approach to life at all, and that's a challenge. And the challenge is, do you invest in that person or not, too? And we'll talk about that a little bit more. So let's keep that thought in mind. Now, one thing I would say for all of us as we think about individuals we're mentoring, junior faculty have a lot of issues, and they have a lot to navigate. So, you know, where do I want to go? Who can help me? But I would say the most important question is who can help me make the best choices, and who in the organization can support me. And one of the advantages of mentoring is sometimes it does help get the institutional resources to the person who's at the door trying to make those choices. Okay. Not always, but it's a good step. I think mentors also can assist us with staying on time and developing a sense of time, because when we start out and we're so eager. You know, when you're setting up your first research program, you've got your first job, you know, the sky's the limit. Well, the reality is, when you hit the reality that you've got teaching commitments, and you've got clinical commitments, and you've got to get your experiments done, and your grants written, and your papers written. How do I do this all? It can be pretty daunting. A good mentor can help sort out what are the tasks that need to be done now, and what are the things that we plan for that will occur over the next couple years, or even 10 years from now. And it may be that someone you're mentoring thinks, well, you know, someday maybe I'd like to be a division chief, or I'd like to run a fellowship program, or be a graduate program director, or be a department chair. That doesn't happen overnight. Those are things that there have to be an accumulation of skills and experience and growth to be able to take on those roles. I would also say mentors can also help make sure the mentee is writing some of this down, that there's a plan. And I think oftentimes we're also capable intellectually that we keep this in our heads and we fail to write it down and hold ourselves accountable. Now, just like for those of us who write grants, we're good at grant writing and making timelines. Sometimes we need to do this even for what we want to accomplish in the workplace. I would also say mentors can be just a wonderful resource for a young faculty member when they're making that transition to establishing their scholarship and they're sorting out how to build their identity. Again, mentors have great networks, and so mentees should always take full advantage of those. Mentors can also point you to opportunities you may not know about, both within the institution and outside. A number of your professional societies have very good career development opportunities that you may not know about, and a mentor can point you in that direction or help you be a competitive applicant. And again, networking and support to learn new skills sometimes is essential. And right now, for example, the wave of clinical CER, comparative effectiveness research, is coming across us because it's built into the healthcare reform package. And a lot of new funds will be there for any of us to do studies comparing one medication to another, or comparing one patient population to another, or one mechanistic outcome to another. To do that kind of work, personally for me to do that kind of work, I'm not trained in it. I would have to get new skills and be polished at them in order to be able to move in that direction. So again, mentors can really help with empowering your career success, because many times they can find and connect you to those resources very effectively and very efficiently and in a very helpful way. And again, I would say where mentors can really be effective in terms of careers is really making sure you're planning your career and not just having it happen because this is the next step. And I think that's it's a difficult issue sometimes to tease out. How do we move from, I've made it through graduate school, I've made it through my postdoctoral training, I've completed my residency, I've got my first job. But what we're talking about is building a rich academic life in an organization where your values and the values of the organization come together, and your goals are to create new knowledge, to train the next generation, to make sure the world improves. And I think that's where mentoring can really help you. Skill development, absolutely. This is something at every stage of our career. As we take in new responsibilities or go in new directions, we need to be thinking. I also think mentors can help us with something that can happen with very intellectual individuals like ourselves. And you're all very intellectual. You may not recognize it, but you are. It is so easy to get isolated, not because you're trying to be isolated, but because you're focused and you're busy working. And mentors can help make sure you're not missing out important changes in your organization or new opportunities where your skills may be of great value. So I think these are things to think about. And certainly young faculty, one of the hardest things is to say no. You get asked to review a manuscript. Okay, senior faculty, are you much better at saying no? Oh yeah, we say no thank you. We learn how to say it very nicely. And I think this diffusion of effort is the challenge many of us are facing because we've worked so hard to carve this place we are in academics, and we want to do it all. And in reality, we have to pace ourselves and be strategic. And that's where I think mentors can be very helpful. So let's turn to some best practices for mentoring and ideas on what makes a good mentee and what makes a good mentor. And there's lots written on this, so these are just some ideas that I think may be helpful. You're striving to have an effective relationship. And so mentees need to know what the goals are for that relationship. The mentor should not be driving the relationship. It should be the mentee. And the mentee has to be gracious about seeking feedback and guidance and being open to trying suggestions that the mentor would provide. There is nothing worse for a mentor than having a mentee who just seems not to be listening or willing to try or interact in the way that your skills can offer. Maintaining confidentiality, absolutely essential, because it has to be a relationship where you can talk frankly that, boy, I bombed that lecture. I wasn't prepared. I put too much material in it. Now I'm worried the department's upset with me. The mentor can help that mentee with a strategy for, okay, how are you going to improve this? What are you going to do next time, okay? And restore confidence. Mentors, your job is, again, to facilitate that individual's growth and learning and to really be the conduit if they need resources and individuals, and whether it's space, time, or money, or most of the time, our colleagues. Providing guidance and feedback and evaluating the mentee's plans. And that's not to say, mentee, your plan, way overambitious. No, it's to take what they're eager to do and help them be a little more strategic about it. Maybe instead of accomplishing things in 6 months, it'll take 18 months, and they'll need some new resources. Again, confidentiality is absolutely essential because you're both likely, if it's a good relationship, to share things of how you felt in a situation or things that are very personal. And it needs to be a safe space. There is no broadcasting allowed of mentee-mentor relationships. I would say, in fact, it's a very quiet relationship to the outside world. And in order for it to be a good relationship, though, you have to have a strategy to stay in touch. Now, there are individuals I've used as mentors for myself that I've only seen at national meetings that I go to, professional meetings, because we're at different institutions. So sometimes you can get excellent mentoring from a colleague who, someone I worked with when I was a postdoc. I won't tell you who this person is. It's not my postdoc mentor. But we used to catch up every year for a cup of coffee at a national meeting we both went to. And he was one of the best mentors I've ever had because he was watching out for me. And I always appreciated that. He was confident that I could really handle whatever I was being given as an academician. Now, again, it's a relationship. I think we also have to make sure mentees are prepared and come to the plate. I would say both mentors and the mentees have, if you commit to a relationship, if it's a formal relationship, you must be prepared and respectful of each other's time and accept responsibility. But I would also say a good mentee, the best mentees I've had are the ones that come to me and come with, well, I'm thinking of this is a possible solution, this is a solution, this is a solution. And they're not just there to say, oh, this is terrible. Why is Omaha so cold in the winter? Things that we can't do anything about. Okay. I think another part of it is that there are times when we mentor each other that we use email, or we pick up the phone, or we see each other in passing. I would say email can be good, but there are times email is not good. And sometimes with mentoring, to me as a mentor, I really appreciate seeing body language. I like seeing my mentee's response. It makes it easier for me to listen to what they're saying and seek clarification so I don't misunderstand what they're saying. And you all know email can really get things off on a wrong footing because we misinterpret emails all the time. So sometimes with mentoring, if you have a relationship that's established and it's a mentee-mentor relationship you've been doing for a year or so, periodically you can check in by email and say, how are things? And somebody will say, that's good. But then I would make sure you find time. You can get into work 15 minutes earlier and grab a cup of coffee and find a table here and talk for 15 minutes. And that 15 minutes of FaceTime can really make your relationship be of tremendous value to the mentee, and for you as a mentor, have confidence that you're spending time with someone who, on a relationship, who really wants to grow and improve, okay? And again, absolutely, this is all built on trust and mutual respect. There's no way that mentoring can thrive without it, and that's why I think it's a wonderful value for our academic institutions, because that's what we do to each other as professional colleagues. And absolutely, and this is for us as mentors who are anxious to have our mentees be successful, the hardest part for us sometimes is to kind of sit on our hands and listen, because we want to get there and fix it for the mentees. We see them going down a direction and they're not listening to us, and sometimes that can be very hard. Or they're not willing, as we were talking about earlier, to do the hard work that a career takes. And I think that also is, whether it's generational or it's age-related or experience-related, I think sometimes the mentors have a harder role because we have to listen really hard and make sure we're not pushing the mentee to be just like ourselves, because each of our mentees are unique. They come with unique backgrounds and gifts. And frankly, for those of you who are parents in the rooms, with children, each of our children are different and unique. And they look at us sometimes and they say, oh, Mom, you're pretty old. And they're pretty straightforward. And mentoring is a little more sophisticated because you're sharing in common this body of professional interactions that you both cherish. And I think that's a a fair assumption. I would recommend, if you're setting up a mentoring relationship, whether it's one that your department has decided is going to do a formal mentoring program, or someone has contacted you because they've seen you and they really want some help and advice, I would sit down and start with some goal setting. You know, what do we hope to accomplish, say the next 6 months. Let's give it 6 months and see how this is going. And then maybe have some discussions about what are your immediate goals and what are your long-term goals. And sometimes you'll need to separate these out. I would say write it down, because what happens is we're really good at writing things down, but we don't write down the things for us that matter the most. So really try to commit that relationship. It can be very informal, but make sure you can pull it out and reevaluate it. Mentoring relationships can get derailed, and they get derailed if there's confidentiality is broken or trust is broken. Most of the time it's lack of effective communication, and I think sometimes the mentees expect the mentor is going to run after them and set up all the meetings, and vice versa, the mentor is expecting the mentee to set up the relationships, the meeting times and places. I think this is something the two of you need to discuss at the outset of your relationship. You know, how often are we going to get together? Is once a month about right? Or you know what, I'm going into a period where I'm interviewing for some jobs. Could we plan to meet every other week, and then if I don't have anything new, we'll cancel it. But it's on the books and we've protected the time. And there are different types of communication. And you know, email is good, but I would say the best mentoring occurs when you talk face to face. Okay, we're going to take a few minutes and find some space on the back of your handout or on the front of your handout. If you are creating a plan for yourself, okay, and I want you to all pretend you're mentees right now, okay? And, okay. What new skills and knowledge do I need to learn that I'm going to put to work in the next 3 to 6 months, okay? So what are some short-term goals? What are some things I need to accomplish in the next few months, okay? If you as a mentee take a few minutes, and you can just kind of scribble while we're going through this, write these ideas down, then when you meet with your mentor, you're better prepared. And you're better prepared to say, you know, what can I do to get there? Is there something new I need to learn? You're better able to articulate to your mentor what you're hoping to achieve from your conversations. And likewise, the big question, the $64 question, who in my network can help me achieve my goals? And sometimes we have the right network, we know all the players and we're all set to go, but many times when we take on something new, you get this realization that I'm not really sure I have the folks I need in my bag of tricks to get this work done. In the sense that I'm going to be doing a new research project and I need a statistician. Well, who should I go to? Then the challenge is, who can help you find that network, okay? And again, committee work. Sometimes as faculty, you know, we have lots of committee assignments. Try to learn from those committees, and if you ask to take on a leadership role, what have you learned from that leadership role that will help you with what your plan is for the next 3 to 6 months? So 3 to 6 months, it's February, so we're talking about March, April, May, okay? And then if you think about 6 months, it takes us through the summer. Now, part of this is that we as academicians are so busy serving others that sometimes we don't take enough time to take care of ourselves. And that's where I think mentoring is one of the best gifts you can give yourself, because you do it with a colleague who cares about your success. And, you know, again, and I'd like to come back to this question of differences in generations, where values can be very different amongst individuals, where many of you come from a very strong tradition of giving and serving others. And we live in a world where there's so many influences on young individuals today. They may not have the same values. And I think sometimes that's a huge challenge, because it's easier to mentor someone when your values are in common. I think it's much more difficult when there are some differences that are fundamental. And my guidance on that would be is to really try then to stick to the professional skills that are needed, and try to reserve judgment as a mentor from where this relationship will end up. And, you know, I'm not a big fan of keeping relationships if they're not productive, too. And I'll give you some insight on that. So, but I would say give it a go before you make that decision. Okay, you know, as faculty planning your careers, you need to know your passions, like we talked about at the beginning. You need to know what it is that gets you up in the morning, brings you great joy. There's a reason why you've come to Creighton, and you should make sure you remind yourself of that, because there are probably a number of very good reasons, okay? And it's not just because the winters are very cold, okay? It's because there's excitement here. There's a place where you can build and grow and serve others. You need a plan, and you need resources. And sometimes the resources to accomplish your plan don't have to be lots of money, lots of time. Many times it's just that extra confidence and guidance that another professional who has, you know, faith and confidence that you're going to be able to meet that challenge, okay? And that, to me, sometimes is the greatest gift that a mentor can bring a mentee. Now, back to roller coasters. We started out with roller coasters. This is Kennywood, which is a famous one in Pittsburgh. And again, I've never ridden on it. I would be crying. I'd be in the back hiding. I close my eyes the whole time. It's purely agony for me. But sometimes academics does feel like a roller coaster. You've got your paper accepted, and then the next day, oh, they want me to bring in another grant, and whoops. Or, you know, my mentee just gave a great, my student I'm advising gave a great seminar, and then, oh, they just failed an exam. You know, it's constant up and down. The big W is what we call it. And our challenge is to make sure that we manage these kinds of, this lifestyle that we have. I would say for your career success, aside from mentoring, and I see mentoring as absolutely essential, you've got a host of individuals here within your organization that are essential for your career success, and you need to develop relationships with all of them. You know, your division chief or your department chair, if you're still not comfortable talking to your chair one-on-one, you need to work on that. And that's maybe something you can discuss safely with a mentor. How do I go about being more effective? You know, my chair, when she sits down or he sits down with me, seems pretty impatient. How do I get their attention? How do I communicate effectively? We work with many individuals that are administrative folks. And on the business side, the reality is we're all facing economic pressures, and they're going to continue to grow. I mean, the forecast doesn't look very promising there. It means we have to make sure we appreciate and respect each other's knowledge and extract the best of what they have to offer. For those of you doing bench work or clinical work, research work, you've got to really make sure you're utilizing the infrastructure and appreciate those individuals. Right now at our library in Pittsburgh, we have the best reference librarians I've ever met in the world. They'll do searches for us to help us do literature searches for our manuscripts. I'm in awe of this. This is like a candy store. And it's one of these things where I had never realized that I could take advantage of those kinds of resources. I used to do it myself. I still do, but now I have a partner. Educational resources. You have folks that are experts in teaching and learning and know how to write exam questions. And there are times where the solution for what you've been doing on an educational side, you need to try something different. Same thing on the clinical side, and certainly in the area of faculty affairs and faculty development, you have wonderful resources, and many of them are here in the room with us. But I would say each of us in this room need to make sure we have one or two individuals that we trust, that we can turn to as a mentor. So that if something unexpected happens tomorrow, and say we get a very difficult ethical issue, and there are times in academics we run into ethical issues. We're very idealistic. We want things to be perfect. We want our students to do well. We want to fix everything. And the challenge with academics is also to be true to ourselves and to do good work, but there are sometimes we have to make choices. And mentors can help you figure out how to be most productive in your scholarship. I think those of you on the clinical side, and there are many of you here in the room that are on the clinical side, this is a challenging time because getting that protected time to do some scholarly work means you have to be very creative. It means you have to kind of assemble a group of folks to help you because the clinics, the demand for your services are so great, and they're going to get greater as we move into the continuation of managed care. Last but not least, I think you're in the most wonderful world you could possibly be in. I think academic careers are wonderful. And I think if you develop relationships as mentors and mentees with each other, the richness of this professional community will continue to grow over time in ways that are just absolutely wonderful. And I want you to leave thinking back today on that person that mentored you, that you reflected on, because I saw each of you excited and optimistic. If that person is still on this face of the earth, they may have passed on, send them a note today that you were at a mentoring session and you still remember what a difference they made in your life at that one time, okay? And that's a pretty high bar. So if you can meet that, I know your careers will go more smoothly and the roller coaster will seem a little flatter and not quite so hilly. And in the meantime, I want you all to think good thoughts for the Super Bowl next week. And I realize we're close to the folks that wear the cheese on their head, but I want you to think good thoughts for the Steelers too. So, okay, thank you. And